Well, so let's talk about this.
Yeah,
Alex, you are living in Berlin, working remotely, um, and your book is called, remind me,
it's
show
remotely
me, show me.
productive. I have one right here. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, remotely productive. The subtitle's leading better online meetings and workshops. I started with a much more boring title. It was like the art of online facilitation, and then I got hooked on this pun, which I thought was fun because I feel like we can only be so productive remotely. I think there are limits to what's possible, and I think this kind of addresses that a little bit.
I
So
love that you're acknowledging that because there's so much going on in the remote collaboration world, which is like, no, it's all perfect and it's all wonderful. You're just not doing it right.
yeah,
It's like you can do so much, but there are also edges to anything, right? Where
yeah, yeah, definitely. I also like personally my journey to this was not really a great one. Like, I mean, like everyone, I went online in 2020 and I felt like my hands were tied at first and like tried to make things work for a year and gradually learning. But and I went through a period of like real mourning where I was like, you know, I feel like I've lost something in my life not working face to face. And, what's the future like now? Like, is this a good job anymore? And I think and this book in a way was sort of an attempt to figure out like, what is the way forward? Like how, is there a positive way forward that I could enjoy personally too? So
oh, that's
yeah,
wonderful. I don't think I've heard anybody talk about their grief journey, right? The
yeah,
going through the stages of mourning and loss. Do you feel like
yeah.
you came out the other side? I mean, I don't want to skip to the bottom line too fast, but
To some extent, yeah. I mean, I really love in-person workshops, and I learned some good skills about facilitating, and that was something I loved to do prior to the pandemic. And so, and I haven't really, I found that you can't do everything you could do in person. There's still some gaps, and I think, yeah, in the end of the book, I do say like, I'll give it away. Basically, I say I think that there's you can do a lot more than most people think working online, and we
yeah,
can have high quality workshops be part of most weeks of work and
yeah,
get much better results, but you still really benefit from meeting face to face.
cool. Very,
And
very cool.
yeah,
So tell me a little bit about, so what kind of work do you do? Um, and why this book now?
yeah. So I'm head of product for the European Payments Initiative. So I lead product managers. So I have a group of 15 product managers on my team, and we're building a new payments platform in Europe. Think an alternative to Visa or PayPal, but over here. And And so like my basic task is all about like getting groups of people to agree about what we're building,
Right.
and making sure we're on the same page about this. And so, for me, like workshops are a key part of that, just because with 15 people, I just don't have enough time to work with everybody one on one as much as I want. So I'm always looking at ways that we can use more effective workshops and meetings to get the group moving in the right direction together. And yeah, so I actually last summer, so I started the book in May of last year, and when I sat down to write it, I actually tried to write a product management book, and it was coming out so boring that I had to give it up. And I was like, the thing I can write is this book on online facilitation. So I switched gears to this one, and but it's interesting because this is just one part of my day job, workshops. I think there's a lot of other sides of product management that are not workshops, and
So
yeah.
then, if you are a product manager and you pick
Mhm.
up your book, should they pair it with like Teresa Torres's book or something like that? And then you get like a fabulous launch
Yeah,
into a
yeah.
full stack.
Yeah, I think so. It's really targeted specifically at the problem of meetings and workshops only. And this is, there's a lot more to making this work at the moment than just that. But I tried to keep it focused on a pretty narrow topic because I think it's something a lot of people need help with.
So when you talk about meetings and workshops, that is often in the literature this one general phrase that is supposed to apply to any time two people get together. But in reality, meetings and workshops come in all flavors and sizes. Which types of meetings and workshops are you talking about? So, and corollary question, who is this book for?
Yeah, so it's really for it's for all kinds of meetings, ranging from your. So I feel like one-on-one meetings over video are fairly straightforward. Like people
Hmm.
generally can converse one-on-one like the way you and I are without a lot of work because we're focused on one person. There, it's easier to get feedback. Your head is a bit bigger on my screen. So I think in this case, people are okay with this kind of conversation. I think it's when you get groups that are bigger than three people, it starts to get more awkward, starts to get more challenging. And so the book kind of goes through a progression first of like how to improve some of your everyday meetings. So maybe you have like a weekly meeting with your team talking about a bunch of topics, or maybe you have to come to a decision. And so it starts out with these sort of more everyday scenarios. And then the later part of the book starts to talk about how to design workshops where you've got more complicated goals that you want to get to. Maybe you want to make a plan for something. Um, maybe you need multiple groups to come together and agree. And so the second part of the book's about designing your own workshop. So thinking about how to go from a goal to breaking it down into a bigger agenda, and then and designing the different activities to feed into each other. And then the third part is a bit more advanced skills for facilitation. So what to do when you're trying to get groups um, to a goal. How can you help them with that?
So is that when you say advanced skills, is that like dealing with dysfunction or people getting stuck or interrupters or like all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, exactly. Dealing with
Mhm.
conflicts, also like how to really optimize your screen setup, how to use
Ooh.
technology. Actually, I should look at the contents to remember what's in it. But also, yeah, dealing with energy, how to maintain energy and build
Hmm.
momentum.
Hmm.
How to use scripts if you're in a higher criticality situation where you're a bit scared of going in, how you can use scripts for your what you're going to say to make things easier, how to get people engaged early in the meeting, and then the bit about hybrid workshops also, because I think those are worth thinking. If you have a substantially hybrid workshop, it's a bit different. And then also just emergency moves, because I think, as an example, so we just finished our quarterly planning yesterday. So this is a 2-day online workshop we do with about
Oof.
100 people across nine countries.
Uh-huh.
And so this is quite a complex process where we come together as a big group in the beginning, then we split off into like a mini conference in parallel tracks, and then the teams go off on their own to plan, and we come back together at the end. And you always hope that at the end you've resolved all the issues, you've handled the dependencies, and everybody's ready to start the quarter.
Hmm.
And sometimes that happens. Like sometimes people say, "Here are our plans, everything's great." And
Yeah.
the
Push
meeting I was in,
magic.
yeah, yeah, and the meeting I was in yesterday was not one of those, right? So one of the things that happened is we do a fist of five to check for commitment, and so you're looking for people with like level 3, 4, and 5. Where they're committed, and we had a lot of people with ones and twos coming into the closing. So, and we
Ooh.
had multiple teams that were like, "We're not ready to move forward." And so this is a tricky situation where you've got 50, 60 people on the phone or on the video call. You're not close to agreement about a plan, and how do you get them to a satisfying end of the meeting? A
Right.
satisfying enough point. And so the book goes into a little bit about like how do you deal with emergencies like that.
Wow. That sounds just like every external facilitator's nightmare, right? Like
Yeah,
if you're hired to come in from outside and you get to the end and you've got like half the group that needs to continue to workshop. But as an internal facilitator, you've got options. So that's quite
yeah,
the
you can you can
scenario.
You can take more time, yeah. So, I
Mhm.
mean, I think the audience is potentially quite broad because I really did try to start with like everyday people, everyday scenarios, and advance up to more advanced skills. I think, the motivation for a lot of this. Years ago I worked with Jean Tabeka. I don't know if you knew of her.
Yeah.
She's the one who really taught me facilitation, and she had a 2-day class on facilitation in person. That was a wonderful class. It's actually the thing that cemented the skills for me was taking this class. And we tried at that company to sell this class repeatedly, and we just found it was hard to get companies to sign up for this class because it was, even though everybody wanted to improve their meetings, it's just was hard to commit that time to it. And so a lot of us who worked with Gene have been really trying to figure out how do we bring those skills to a bigger audience. And I've encountered a lot of people who go to a facilitated meeting and they're like, "Oh, I could never do this. I could never learn to facilitate." And and Jean was always like, "No, no, these are skills you can learn." Like she wanted people to learn these skills. And so for me, the book is like an attempt to like get a couple people more interested in learning this skill set. Because I think yeah, there's so much unnecessary suffering in bad meetings that I'd love to get these skills out there. Sorry, I'm going on a bit.
No, 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 that's good. I mean, I think, and actually, for anybody who's watching this that hasn't encountered Jean's work, that her book should be one of those foundational readings that you should have in your pocket if you are a professional meeting designer or innovator or facilitator, because, it's a little daunting, it's a little
Mhm.
thick, and it's like, I think the cover is gray, so it looks like a 1980s textbook or brown or
Mhm.
something like that. But it's
Yeah.
wonderful. Her work is a wonderful foundation. Um,
Yeah, she tried to
so
make a really comprehensive book, I think, at a time when there wasn't much out there about how do we lead teams in this way. So, yeah.
yeah, yeah. And I know a lot of the facilitation community has other foundational books like the Facilitator's Guide to Participatory Decision Making and things like that. Jean's work, and it sounds like your work, has a stronger rooting in how teams actually work,
Mhm.
as opposed to just special occasion workshops. So,
Yeah, I mean, I do though. I do talk about Connor because I think, his model is like it's at the center of how I think about designing any workshop and meeting. And I think this is one of the big challenges for people. How much is your audience familiar with Connor already? Uh,
I think if we talk about the diamond, right? Like
yeah.
focus,
Hmm.
diverge, emerge, grown zone, and
Yeah.
then convert. And we'll include a link to a lovely little video about that
Okay.
below for those who
Yeah.
aren't.
This idea of passing through the grown zone and that you actually want to enter it and go through that and leave it, I think is really not many people outside the facilitation community really understand how important that is and how desire like you want people to be in that mode
Right.
for a little while, and you want them to feel safe enough that they don't feel like they're going to die in the grown zone, and they feel like they can actually, you're going to take them somewhere. And I think that's really important when it comes to thinking about any more complex meetings that you're trying to design.
So I'm curious then, as you were working on your book, what was some of your favorite tips? Because like the grown zone is like one of those things, right? Like that meeting designers and facilitators should understand, and that probably we should be telling participants about more often, right?
Hmm.
Just like you go to get your teeth done or you get a shot or whatever, and it says, now this is going to hurt for a minute, but then you will be better. It
Yeah,
helps
yeah.
people prepare and work, make their way through sometimes challenging conversations or challenging moments. But what are some other aspects of meetings online and being productive in the virtual world that you found like this is a magic tip everybody needs to know?
I think, that's an interesting question. Let me think for a minute. Um, Depending on your level, um, I think a lot of beginner facilitators don't think enough about what they're doing with their screen and how many monitors they're using and where their camera is. And I think this is like it's something that, so for me, like I have you on a 27-inch screen, I have a camera on top of it. I have your window arranged in a certain way. I've got some other supporting windows next to the video. I think that taking some time to set up your personal facilitating environment um, goes a long way. I see a lot of people who are just like working on a 13-inch laptop and trying, and you can do that, but you're really limiting yourself. So I think just thinking about spending a little time thinking about what do I want to be able to see? Like if I want to
Hmm.
see faces and content at the same time, how can I do that? Because it really helps to see faces and content at the same time. So I think it's kind of a generic thing, I guess.
No, but it's huge. We ran a large experiment last year, and I found that anytime I had to facilitate away from a comfortable tech environment, and it was either
Mhm.
online or hybrid, it was incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't so much, where the people were, it was whether or not I was able to manage, the flow of things based on where I was. So,
Yeah.
that's really huge.
Yeah, actually, in the meeting I was in yesterday, I was co-facilitating that with somebody. We met in the same location. We each had a laptop, a separate large screen. We also had a very large TV in the background to monitor the meeting. Like we took extra time to set up the space so we could see what was happening. And we also were watching Slack at the same time, and just it takes extra time for the more complex things to do that, but it really pays off.
It does.
I think like one thing that I love, I learned from Judy Rees. I don't know if you know her.
I know Judy. Uh-huh.
She had talked about the importance of like thinking about whether you're screen sharing or not. And like so she actually had done some videos a while back where she said like be very careful not to screen share the whole time because it kind of breaks up the Zoom window in a way where people aren't seeing faces as much, and seeing faces really matters. And I think so. There's a couple of interesting things building on this. Like one is that in the meeting I had yesterday, right, we're trying to get to convergence. We're not all agreeing. We're trying to figure out, do we do a fist of five or not? And one thing that my Toby, my co-facilitator, and I did is we shut off the screen share so that everybody could see everybody's faces during the difficult time, right? So we're trying to all, about the large group trying to feel together this difficult moment, and doing it without anything screen sharing changes the dynamic dramatically. And the other
Hmm.
thing around this is that I don't know if you remember, like MTV being criticized by the older generation years ago for frequent camera angle shifts, like really fast cuts from view to view. It's a little dating me, I suppose, to say this, but what they were doing is triggering this orienting response in our brain, which causes, like when you change camera angles, it causes people to
Pay
refocus.
attention.
And
Hmm.
yeah, and you can do the same thing by screen share and not screen share. And this is like this is like the most powerful thing I think anyone can do as a facilitator, because it just like changes the tone instantly. And I think this is something that anyone can do, right, to affect a meeting immediately. Is just, screen share, stop screen sharing, and so that's something we could use more. This is, I guess, the some simple things.
No,
What
that's
else?
a that's a great and underused tip. I know a lot of facilitators like don't like to screen share because they're like, no, it's all about human connection and whatnot. And sometimes they're missing the power of both reorienting everybody back onto a common view, right? So
Yeah,
sometimes when you screen share and the screen changes, like you said, you recapture attention, but you also reground everybody. This
yeah,
is where we're at, and everybody learns differently. So sometimes having the visual reference is incredibly helpful for folks who may have been kind of lost or distracted. Um,
yeah,
but then that stop start is a great tip. It's often like the tip to just be quiet sometimes,
yeah.
which is another change in dynamic that freaks people out. And they're like, wait, what? Why isn't
Yeah.
anybody talking? What did I miss?
This is a tough one. I mean, Gene taught us in person to wait like 7 seconds for anyone to speak up, and this is hard to do in person, and even harder when you ask a prompting question. It's even harder online to wait that long. But yeah, there's so many people who it takes them that long to find the way to unmute, and there might be somebody who's trying to unmute but can't get to the window, and it just takes that long. And if you move on too fast, yeah, you lose it.
Right.
So I I think there's more foundational things, of course, like, around the sort of standard workshop design stuff, though. Um,
Those are great. Those are
yeah,
fabulous. Like great reminders and highlights that, which gets kind of to my next question, which is, what is a piece out there of common advice or, something you've seen advocated that you actually don't believe works very well, or that you
hmm.
believe only works in some circumstances and people should stop, preaching gospel when it's really sort of like a, hey, here's a tip that might apply sometimes.
I mean, ironically, the book mostly talks about how to have more structured meetings, because I do believe that, like Clancy and Morris's book, I'm sure you've read the Facilitator's Pocket Guide.
I
Remote
haven't.
Facilitators Pocket Guide. Okay, this is the first book I could find on remote facilitation, and they talk about how social rules are not visible in online spaces, and so you have to be really explicit about creating the social rules and the rules of engagement if you want to be able to work productively, because people can't rely on their sort of intuitive social understanding that we rely on face to face. And I believe that's true. And a lot of this book is about how to introduce structure in a way that helps. And I do think for some times and some problems, it's actually fine for four people to sit in a call with no agenda, no, like, where you know the topic, but you don't know how you're going to solve it. And actually, it's okay not to get to resolution, even, to spend an hour talking about a topic, not to get to resolution is sometimes the best thing you can do. It's interesting. Mike Burrows, who wrote, was one of the Kanban experts, wrote a book called Agenda Shift and Right to Left. He had reviewed my book early on, and he said this is a great book for if you're trying to help groups get to decisions, but sometimes like just understanding an alignment is more important than a decision. And I think because remote meeting time is so exhausting, and there's so many ineffective meetings we're in, it's easy to like over optimize all of it. And sometimes you do just need to sit together in a call that's not structured. So
So I couldn't agree with you more, right? I actually find no agenda, no attended to be one of the dumbest things people might say. Uh, because it's so not what they actually do, but also reductive in a way that's
mhm,
not helpful. But there is this tension between having predictability in your schedule so that you know when you can get focus and flow work done, and having well-structured meetings that you know how to participate in well and that engage people and that lead to business results, and creating mind share, that
mhm.
alignment conversation. Do you have any recommendations about how people can be remotely productive in a way that helps balance those competing needs?
Yeah, I sort of feel like this is the topic that the title suggests I should know something about, but it's in fact like the next book, like this question of how do we build an overall um, remotely productive day? Is that sort of what you're
Uh-huh.
thinking about? Like, yeah,
Well, and I mean, just like, is let's say you need to like get on a call and just sense make, right?
yeah.
Um, how do you how do you know to schedule that versus something with structure? Like what makes it okay to do that?
I think, well, it's okay to do that with smaller groups. Like I wouldn't like I think like an unstructured sense making call with more than four people is questionable, like,
Yeah,
but I think with a couple people it's okay. So that's one thing. I think
that's a great rule of thumb.
yeah,
Like if you get beyond like an
maybe
easy
even
tiny screen, yeah, two to three,
yeah.
four max. That's great.
Even with like four people is even almost too much, I think, but yeah, I think it's interesting. My company is 100% remote. So we do have offices in different locations, but nobody's really based in those cities. So everyone is, and the teams are completely spread out across Europe. And so we do our best with remote work. We have a set of like rituals that we use to guide day-to-day uh, our day-to-day work that help us with the basics. But inevitably, yeah, there are certain situations where yeah, I think it's topic based, right? It's topics that don't neatly fall into like let's break down and plan this, let's make a decision, or maybe topics that come up repeatedly in multiple meetings but are not getting anywhere. I think in those cases, you need a bit more openness. I mean, I have one particular nagging strategic topic where I'm like, there's no way I'm going to solve this remotely. I need to get people together for a day, and I
Uh-huh.
haven't done it yet. It's And I'm trying to think, why do I know that? I think it's because I know it can't be solved in an hour.
Uh-huh.
I know that the people I need to talk to, if I invite them for it's going to be really hard to get them to sit down for 2 hours. It's going to be virtually impossible to get them to stay for that long. Um, so Yeah. But again, this is more like when now I'm answering when do I reach to an in-person meeting, as opposed to an open or less structured meeting.
No, but listening to you think through this question is useful, right? Like
Yeah.
that, so I heard a couple of guidelines in there. I heard time, right?
Hmm.
Like having anybody sit in an online session for more than a few hours is pretty darn tricky.
Yeah.
Because our attention just, I mean, it is so exhausting to try and maintain social cohesion through this artificial
Hmm.
mechanism. I heard persistence, right? I heard that, like, here's the thing that we haven't been able to solve by, putting up a document and commenting on it and having the occasional call to work through bits.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean,
cool.
one thing I talk about in the book is one of the issues that makes remote work so difficult is the exits that are available to us. I got this from this 80s relationship book called Getting the Love You Want, where they talk about the thing that destroys relationships is when people check out, basically. And so the one of the assertions of the book is like you should train yourself not to check out. So you know, don't go home and go on your phone because you don't want to face the problems in your marriage. Instead, try to avoid these kinds of things, going and running errands to avoid your issues. And I think one of the things with remote work is that we have these exits available to us all the time, right? There's somebody ringing the
Right.
doorbell, dropping off a package. I can leave this meeting for 15 minutes and nobody will, I can go fold laundry. I can go make myself some food. I can shut off walk away from the computer and do something with my kids. There's so many exits available for us. And not to mention like the internet being available and all this content, right?
Hmm.
There's the
Hmm.
email that I want to go through. There's, all the messages I should be responding to be a good and responsive person. And so there's lots of ways to justify exits. And as a result, it's harder to tolerate boredom in remote meetings compared to sitting in an office. There's certain rules that that you really shouldn't be on your phone the whole time if you're in a meeting. Some people still do it, but I think there's some social pressure to stay present in an office, and that just disappears online. So
Right.
so so getting people to sit with a difficult topic through the boredom, through the discomfort is a lot harder.
So technique wise and tip wise, because that happens in, everyday meetings and decision-making meetings and whatnot. What are some of your go-to strategies for keeping people in the space, the digital
I ju-
space?
yeah, well, one thing is you have to, I think, so there's two directions you can go in this. One is a direction where you say, as a facilitator, I'm going to try to create an experience that's compelling enough that people stay engaged, which is a valid strategy. It's just more work. The other strategy is to say, it's not my job. I'm going to go in the open space direction where people decide for themselves exactly how much to engage. And I let them decide how much of themselves to bring. And I think so actually blending these two approaches can be a good thing. And I think thinking about also the pacing of what you're doing and not having a monolithic single activity for 60 minutes, but instead really thinking about, how do I break this up so that
Mm.
somebody who's checked out has an opportunity to re-engage. So how can I switch from presenting to small group discussion and back? How can I move from using one tool to the other? Move from Miro to face-to-face discussion to documents. Um, if I'm designing the workshop, I think about really breaking it up. And this was really true for this 2-day meeting I just came out of, right? Like we did like 1 hour, 15 minutes of presentation at the beginning, which is a little too much. Like
Hmm.
it's pushing it. On the other hand, it's a quarter kickoff, so people can survive that once a quarter.
Right.
That kind of and but in that case, we changed speakers every like 5 to 8 minutes. So it
Yeah.
wasn't one person talking for an hour and 15. It was probably 12 different people talked over that time period. And so that helped. And then after that, we moved into a breakout mode with lots of parallel sessions. So that again, each time you change, I think it gives people an opportunity to choose, do I want to engage now? Like maybe I didn't
Hmm.
like that all the other part, but now I've got to think about, am I going to join a breakout or not? Am I going to, so that's I guess that's my initial answer.
No, I like it. I think I heard two things in there. I heard um I heard the advice that as the facilitator, you have responsibility for uh paying attention to the energy, right? And
Mhm.
designing for different kinds of engagement and energy on a regular basis. And if you think about group energy as something that starts off high anytime there's a switch, right? Because it
Mhm.
does. Um,
Yeah.
just like you were talking about with the screen sharing, that'll catch your attention. Oh, animals moving.
Mhm.
We've got an influx of energy, but as you stay within that modality, that will drain.
Mhm.
Right. So you're topping it up and resetting at a higher energy point every time you've got a switch of modality, and that's important. And the other thing you said that I thought was incredibly important is that you're not responsible for other adults' choice to engage.
Yeah.
I
You
mean,
can try to help them, but yeah,
you,
you can't. I have a couple of experiences in my career where I had a realization, like in a workshop, I've lost this person. Like, how much can I try to get them back? And I remember the first time I was like, I can't get this person back today. They're gone. Like they're either we messed up or something went wrong or they have something on their mind, and I need to keep going anyway because they're they're out. And I've also been on the other side of it where I was just in a bad emotional state showing up at a workshop and I was out and there was nothing that, I was just full of my own things in my head and there's nothing the leaders of the meeting could do to fix that. I remember one like specific workshop where I was just really angry at the one of the executives and like it really hurt, and for whatever reason. And I was just like I I couldn't engage. And I was like, I'm going to go to the bathroom. I went to the bathroom and then I just went for a walk because I
right,
knew there was nothing I could do to bring myself back. And I didn't expect the facilitators to fix that. They had other stuff to do. They're responsible for the group. So I think accepting that you can't bring everybody along all the time because, somebody's daughter just broke her arm, and that's more important. That you can't your remote meeting is not going to be this person taking care of their child, because like I mean, yeah.
yeah, no, I love that, and I think it's an important reminder because sometimes people feel so responsible. Oh, I've messed up because this person didn't have a perfect experience. Or if you've led a really an important session, or you've talked about a real topic, and then you do something like feedback at the end, you will get I get like sort of the inverse bell curve. And I don't know if you get this too, but I guess it's a real bell
Mhm.
curve, but it feels inverse because
Yeah,
I get like, 10% who are thrilled. Oh my gosh, that was life-changing, blah, 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 blah. And I get 10% who, hate everything that happened and feel like I've ruined their lives and they wish ill on me and my dog and my family and then a whole bunch of
yeah,
people who
yeah.
think it was fine. And-
Yeah, and sometimes you're just wrong about how people felt about it. I think I've also had that experience too, where I left a meeting exhausted and feeling like I was no good at facilitating this. Like, why do I even try? I don't have the skill at all. And then you talk to people afterwards, and they're like, "That was great. That was a turning point for us." And I'm like, "Yeah, but everybody left like we weren't aligned." And they're like, "It doesn't matter. Like 2 days after that, we solved our problems
right.
because of that discussion." And I think this is again what Mike Burrows was getting at is that like if people are leaving not aligned but knowing what they want to take, what action they want to take, and what their personal motivation is, that can be a great outcome too. But you don't always see it as a facilitator. And as the remote person, I don't know. I like to hang on in the meeting after it's over and see if anyone sticks around because sometimes they do. But most of the time, most people hang up right away.
Yeah.
So you don't get that instant feedback the way you would in a room. Um, so.
Right. So in general, that key tip of create the environment where great things are natural and easy for those who are willing to make great things happen.
Mhm.
And if they aren't willing, you've created the conditions, You might check in to see if maybe
Mhm.
you've made an error, like in what you've done, but otherwise, people's is people's.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah.
Let it go a bit. Um, so cool. It sounds like there are a lot of really useful, grounded bits of advice in your book. What should else should I have asked you about that you'd love to share?
Well, I would love to. I kind of want to talk about your recent thing about working agreements, but that's not really related to this book directly. So maybe we can do that also.
Yeah, yeah, you bet.
Because I think this you had written a post recently about team agreements and why given that I believe team agreements can help and I've seen them help, why is it so rare that people pick up on these things? And I think I've been thinking about this a little bit because I realize I could benefit from getting some team agreements in place into inviting teams to create agreements, especially in the remote environment, because
Hmm.
if you buy what Clancy and Morris wrote, that the social rules are invisible, and if you want people to feel comfortable and safe, there need to be some rules that they agree on. This really would help. Um,
I
but
think
I
is
think
that the article that you read, the one that I wrote about like implicit and explicit and mandates and all how we learn to work together. That.
yeah, and I think so. Yeah, and I think the thing I'm wondering is why is it so hard for teams to make agreements about how they're going to work remotely? Why do we struggle with this? And I think about like I had a team a couple of years ago that was distributed across two continents, and so like a 8 hour time difference, and so a lot of challenges resulting with from that. And we did make team working agreements, and we actually put some effort into building these agreements and deciding like how did we want it to work, and then I think the challenge is like how do you sustain that over time? Like how do you keep going with these agreements, in a longer period of time? It's one thing to have working agreements for a workshop that you agree on at the beginning of the day, and then you hold the group to them for that day. That's relatively straightforward. But for a
Hmm.
team to say we're going to work this way over time, and to really provide each other with correction and adjustment as when team members break those agreements, break those norms, it's super hard to give that kind of feedback in remote work. And yeah, so I think about this a little bit. I think about like what would it take for us to give better feedback in meetings. This is one of the things I've been writing quite a bit about or I wrote about in the book, and I've been blogging about this a little bit. I think we can do a lot using chat to gently
Hmm.
suggest new ways of working in a meeting. Even if you're not running the meeting, even if you don't know how to fix the meeting at all, you can do little things in chat that nudge the group and give a little bits of feedback. And I think it's so easy to give people little glances in face-to-face meetings and little noises that give them little bits of feedback. And remotely, we just don't know how to do that yet.
I would
So,
love to talk about this, and I need to figure out when my dog's freaking out. So I'll be
okay,
back in three
yeah, yeah,
seconds.
yeah,
It was just exactly what you said. There was a package,
yeah.
and she freaked the freak out.
But you came right back.
I did.
Yeah,
Because, dog barking is unprofessional on video.
yeah.
Yeah,
It's okay.
so there are some great tips about this, but I think, I mean, would you like me to share some thoughts on this?
Sure, sure, yeah.
Um, so the thing about, the remote environment is that, right, you have to be more explicit to
Hmm.
begin with. And then the question becomes like, how do you take what was this sort of strange artificial conversation about, oh, we're going to be candid and we're going to put things here and all of it's kind of a funky conversation, the working team
Hmm.
agreeing conversation. How do you make it something that no longer feels funky as you go forward?
Hmm.
Um, and that process, I believe, is a process of first keeping that agreement in front of you on a very regular basis and making um, iteration on it natural and expected.
Hmm.
So Lizette gives a really great example of this where she just in her weekly team check-ins posts the agreement as part of the agenda. And throughout the week, people add comments about anything that came up that was kind of hard or confusing or whatever.
Hmm.
And then every week they say, did anything come up that we need to address? If not, okay, great, let's move on. So it
So
becomes
people are posting in Slack as the week goes on or something like this, and at the end of it, okay,
exactly, or comments in a Google Doc or,
yeah,
whatever, right? Like, oh, I didn't know where to find this. Maybe we can make this clearer. Or, hey, I
hmm
didn't know how to get a hold of you. Can we set an agreement about time?
hmm yeah.
So
It's this collaborative drift article is the one that I read
yeah.
that got me thinking about all this. Yeah.
Right. So you have the initiation of what you think might be a good way of working.
Hmm.
Um, that is the formation of the team agreement. And then through iteration, it becomes, well, yeah, duh, clearly we work that way,
Hmm.
so that when new people are added in, they come in and you're like, okay, well, here are the documents and this channel is for this. And obviously we check in this way so that it becomes embedded in a ritualistic way, right? It
Hmm.
become the environment they walk into naturally has them doing most of the things that
Hmm.
your team has already agreed on. And you can onboard it, like here's where it's all documented. So when you look at teams like Atlassian and GitLab and, Doist and some of these folks who have full on transparent operating manuals,
Hmm.
it's obvious. It's just like,
Yeah.
well, clearly that's how it works around here. But it's a succession stage where it goes from being we had a conversation to we have a ritual to, well, duh, that's the way work is done here.
Yeah. And I think a lot of companies aren't like that, so that aren't in the habit of being intentional about their culture. So for the companies I've worked for, I have worked for some that have been that way. A lot of them are just not. There, a lot of them are have an emergent culture that has come about over time, and the idea of being explicit about a culture is very weird because there's plenty of people who've just never experienced that. It's sort of like, well, yeah, you go to work, meetings are kind of bad, and that's part of why they pay you, and like why, I don't expect, I'm cool with losing 4 hours of my day to not very effective meetings. And so I think it's always a bit awkward to be the one who's saying, no, no, it could be better. Like we could just make some agreements. And people are like, oh, come on, like everyone knows meetings are terrible. It's I think overcoming that is tricky, because in a way, like to try to add structure in these situations is like taking a personal and political risk. And
It
if you do
is.
it wrong, you're saying, hey, the, Bob convened a meeting today with no agenda, no purpose, and rambled between topics. For you to, it's tricky to confront Bob on this
It's
because
very much so.
he probably wishes it was better. He's probably busy. He might be doing his best. And you don't really want to offend the guy, but you're going to this meeting every week and it's not structured. And are you the person who talks to Bob about the improvements he could make, or do you just live with it? And I think it's yeah,
Yeah, no, this is the key, right? So my focus is meeting and
yeah,
collaborative
yeah.
ecosystems, right?
Mhm.
And people have for years been saying, well, everybody just needs to learn how to use an agenda, or everybody just need, or we're going to just make them all 15 minutes, or whatever it is, whatever
Mhm.
the structural element is that is being recommended. And they're ignoring the fact that introducing any of that is um, passing judgment on their colleagues who didn't do it that way before.
Mhm.
And it's doing something that isn't how things are done around there. It's
Mhm.
saying how things are done around here aren't good enough. And that it may be that everybody believes that to a degree, but not necessarily to a degree where they're ready to make a change themselves, because
Mhm.
otherwise they would have. So,
Yeah, and it's furthermore, it's lonely being remote. So I think, it's funny. I had this conversation on Tuesday with a colleague who happens to be in the Berlin office here. He's a completely different part of the company, and we were talking about meetings, and he was talking about his frustration with other meetings that I'm not in, and we were talking about how it could be better. But this only happened because we happened to be sitting in the same office. Like I would never have reached out to him on Slack to have this conversation. So I think in some cases, like but now that I have a little bit of like a colleague who I know is like at least emotionally supportive of this idea of improving meetings, that gives me a little energy to try. And
Right.
I think the challenge is like how do we get enough courage to try making small improvements when we're all kind of in our own homes? It's tough.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things I think, and I picked this up from the remote people who do have those fabulous, clear cultures, right? Who've got
Mhm.
designed, iterated, evolved cultures. That you might consider as a starting spot is having people start with themselves
Mhm.
because they tend to think it's more fun. And they they like being, being clear about how they prefer to work and what works best for them. Because that's
Mhm.
not passing judgment on anybody else, right? Like
Mhm.
for me, I need clear deadlines.
Mhm.
Otherwise, I'll cogitate on things forever, for
Mhm.
example. So, when and I'm putting out a guide on this in a couple of weeks, but when I lead a team agreement thing, the pre-work is like, hey, go figure out, what helps you do your best work.
Mhm.
And what do you need to be able to count on from your team
Yeah.
so that you can work together well? And like that's a different starting spot than how is our team dysfunctional or what's not great about our team or whatever, right?
Mhm.
So if you can start with something that is personal, proactive, generative, might be an easier entry.
Mhm.
And skip the whole this is what sucks conversation entirely. Just don't even go there. Just
Mhm.
go, okay, what could we do that would be great?
Mhm. Yeah, that makes sense. It's and starting from your own personal needs, because I think often we assume like it's interesting too because I manage product managers, so they all have full calendars and they're super busy all the time. And of
Mm-hmm.
course, I am too. And so it's a common challenge we all have is like how do we manage our calendars? And the coping strategies I use would probably be helpful for them, but it's also interesting to learn from them. Like, what are the things that they need that they do in their days to find enough time to focus amid the fairly busy schedule? And yeah, getting that dialogue starting with their ideas is a good way to do it. Just
Well, and it's
yeah.
possible that some of them don't know about time blocking, right? Like
Yeah.
which I'm assuming you do. I assume you take part of your calendar and say, "Oh, this is schedule what you want, not what you don't want," right? Like if you if you don't want to be
Sort
full
of.
of meetings, you just like go, there are no meetings.
Yeah, sort of. I think that so product management's a funny discipline in which that doesn't always
It
I
doesn't
haven't
always
found
work.
that I haven't found that to be a useful strategy. I do have a set of time blocks, and one thing I do is a double lunch block so
Uh-huh.
I block 12 to 1 and 1 to 2, and that way I usually I'm able to protect one of those, and if I'm lucky, they're both free, and I can do some other things also. But but yeah, I think yeah, sorry. I think that finding time to share this stuff with colleagues so that we're making solutions together is important. And I think remote work doesn't always lend itself to the kinds of informal conversations that would lead us to creating these kinds of improvements.
Right, which is why you have to make them explicit,
Yeah.
which is funky, but I dropped another link for an earlier article on finding your own best way of going about it.
Mhm.
But yeah, so cool. So let's wrap this up for people who may be
Mhm.
checking this out. So I have heard um, A, they should check out your book, Remotely Productive. Show us again what it looks like.
Yeah, I would. It's a blue that took quite a lot of effort to choose, but yeah, it printed once in purple and one, yeah, but now it's blue.
Show me inside.
And
What does it look like inside?
yeah, it's
I
a. I
don't
mean,
I don't have a copy yet.
it's mostly text. It's we've got we basically talk. So it starts off with
But it looks
how to start to
super
improve
readable.
your. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's my goal was make it really readable and start you off with a. I've got a couple of toolboxes in the beginning, which
Hmm.
start with the idea of like how to improve a weekly team meeting, and then here I offer a script for that. How to improve a decision meeting, and ultimately then I give you a toolbox of roughly 10 techniques that come with each of those scripts. So
Uh-huh.
in the beginning, there's a bunch of fairly simple things you can start with if you're not ready to design workshops, and then goes into a bit more about designing the workshops. And yeah, not a lot of images, but
That's
there's a
cool
few.
though.
Yeah.
That's cool. I mean, I think, you say you start off with simple things. I think the weekly team meeting is absolutely the most difficult meeting to get right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it is. It sets it. Yeah, well, yeah. Your book, of course, like it goes into the why that is. It sets the tone for everything else, and I think it's so foundational. And yeah,
and it's so easy to make boring.
yeah,
A total waste of time. So you've got this terrible tension between I need this to be predictable and at the same time I need not to bore the snot off of anybody or waste their
yeah.
time.
I mean,
Ugh.
yeah. The approach I suggest is basically using lean coffee. So using a timer and deciding with a Roman vote whether to continue or stop on a topic.
Yeah, that's
Which
awesome.
yeah. So
Very cool.
yeah,
Cool. So they should check out your book. And then is
yeah.
there any other call to action that you would like for folks who are watching this?
Yeah, well, I think about the people around you also who could be helping with meetings, but maybe haven't really thought about it. Because I think there's a lot of people who are like in these meetings thinking it could be better and not knowing where to start. And I think around you in your workplace, there are other allies who are right there and want to begin to change the culture. And so thinking about like how can I get enlist a couple other people to help me begin to make things change? Because that's really the thing I'm trying to figure out is like how to get people started down the road of facilitation. You don't have to be an expert facilitator to make your meetings substantially better than they are. You just need a couple little things. So it's my hope that we can start to create a generation of people who are thinking about this and thinking about how can I make my meetings 10, 20, 50% better with a couple of changes.
Yeah,
So
that's very cool. That's very cool.
yeah,
Thank you so much, Alex,
yeah, thank
for
you.
taking the time to share your work with me and to, enjoy this sort of rambling conversation across these topics. I'm
Yeah,
excited to see that you're pulling these things out and bringing them to a new audience. So,
yeah, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate enjoyed the conversation myself.